D-Day is here, claiming that the invasion of Western Europe has begun. Says that heavy fighting is taking place between the Germans and invasion forces on the Normandy Peninsula, about 31 miles southwest of Le Havre.
German government buildings are already covered with the scrawled signatures of men from the Volga and the cities and plains of Russia.
The French armored division drives on Paris. This unit of the Allied Army of Invasion has been ordered to battle its way to the capital of France, which the patriot population has risen against the Nazi garrison.
Berlin's fall ends Russia's war. Did one more sense rounded off the war in Europe.
The one place that intrigued me was my first trip to London and the House of Parliament in Big Ben. Now, these pictures, you must remember, are more than a quarter of a century old. The thing that amused and entertained our boys who were stationed all over England was Westminster Abbey. And there were quite a few Americans who came there to see the sights and see Westminster Abbey. And these are the scenes that I wanted to photograph on one Sunday afternoon. Another area that intrigued me was Marble Arch. Marble Arch on one Sunday afternoon was full of people. You must remember that London was being bombed almost every night in this particular time. And I was photographing these speakers that were addressing the crowds. Every speaker was speaking on a different subject, but the police stood around and watched, and as long as there were no arguments, any strong arguments, nobody was hurt. And the people in the audience were arguing back with the speakers. But these were just typical shots of how we passed the time waiting for D-Day. Most of the children who lived in England, or a great many I should say, were sent out of the city. But a lot of them had to remain behind. But in spite of a war, they managed to find entertainment. I was rather surprised to see these children drinking out of community drinking cups that were changed to the fountain. And I'd like to make candid shots of these children so they didn't notice me, but every once in a while they did. But this youngster is taking a cool drink on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And we discovered that the St. Paul's Cathedral had been hit several times, but not badly damaged. And of course, one of the other attractions was Buckingham Palace and the gates, which were protected by British troops, not in the bearskin hats which they wore in peacetime, but in full war uniform. And this is the way they paraded up and down. They weren't performing for the camera, but they were actually doing their duty. But you notice the barrage balloons in the background. London had barrage balloons all over the area. And it was said that if it wasn't for the barrage balloons, with all the equipment that was being brought into the country, that the islands would sink into the sea, but the barrage balloons, they said, was holding it up. You must remember, too, that food was pretty scarce in London at this time, and it was being brought in whatever way they could and being unloaded. But it isn't often you get a bright day like this in the spring in London, and this was an opportunity to show what the soldiers were doing while they were waiting for the invasion. This is Fleet Street. Discovered this Irish policeman guarding the street. We saw considerable damage in the area. But soon, we were down on the south coast of England, where we met some of the other correspondents who were scheduled to cross the channel with us. And you'll probably recognize some of the old-timers who covered the war at that particular time. I was given a shovel to defend myself, and it proved to be a valuable instrument. And here we see Larry LeSueur of CBS. Larry LeSueur was covering the war for CBS, and so was Wertenbecker on the left, Jack Thompson of the Chicago Tribune, Ernie Pyle here. And this is a close-up of Jack Thompson. And this is O'Reilly, Larry O'Reilly of the Associated Press. This is Wertenbecker. And we're saying our farewells because we were expected to meet again in Paris. Here on the left, we see Clark Lee of INS and Bill Stoneman, who came from Chicago, from the Daily News. And several other of the correspondents were being boarded aboard a military truck to be taken to the south coast. And we went through small British towns, and life was going on as usual. The people were in the marketplace buying food, and as though nothing was going on. But after a 150-mile ride, that's how we felt riding in an army vehicle. We found Plymouth was pretty badly damaged. A lot of the buildings were completely destroyed, but this was found all over the area. Soon we were approaching the dock area, and we found these American Jeeps ready to be boarded aboard landing craft, and you notice the bars that are attached to their bumpers. And they're designed to cut wires that the Germans had a habit of putting across the road that would sometimes cut off the head of the drivers. We weren't allowed to wander around the area by ourselves. Each crossroad point was under guard of both an American and a British soldier. And if they wanted to see what you had in your bedroll, you had to show it to them. But this is the care that was taken that the secret of the invasion be kept as long as it could. These are the two men, Wes Carroll of the OWI and Pete Carroll and Wes Haynes, rather, who were with me, and we went aboard an LCI number 5. Pete Carroll here came from Boston, and he was a photographer for the Associated Press. And we tried to keep our mind off what was coming, and we knew it was going to be a short time before we would be on board. We had our first taste of K-rations, which didn't taste bad if you were hungry. And we also were able to see the beautiful countryside in that area. And these are the sort of shots I wanted to bring home to show my family and friends. Pete Carroll was using some of his film to make a few shots himself. And soon, we were down at the docks. And there we found units of the 101st Airborne Division carrying everything they could carry by hand, boarding landing craft that were so heavily laden they had to be pushed off the docks by trucks, as you see in this manner. And these men were being taken out to larger craft and boarded before the invasion. And here we see several units carrying grenades, bazookas. They didn't have an opportunity to load this aboard jeeps that were not fully available at this particular moment. We were aboard a fleet of LCIs, And here shown with the commander of the invasion group in the center, and the captain on the right, rather the captain of our ship, Lieutenant Patton, was in command of the LCI number 5, and we found out that he participated in several invasions in the Mediterranean area. And we felt rather confident that he knew what he was doing. But we stayed aboard this ship for almost 5 days. This is the commander of the squadron. I remember Lieutenant Patton's name well because we were with him for so long. Wes Haynes was trying to get ready for the trip into Paris. I think he was premature. And these are units of the 101st Airborne Division aboard our landing craft, amusing themselves. And I don't have to tell you who this man is imitating. He was a Notre Dame football player at one time, and I was told later on that he was killed in the action. Of course, every ship had a mascot, and ours was no different, but the boys provided for their mascot's welfare with the making of a life preserver, just like the ones that they wore themselves. And then one afternoon, Lieutenant Patton briefed the crew and told them that we would be sailing that afternoon. And they let out a cheer because this is the job they were waiting for. They wanted to get it done and go home. And here we see the LCI number 4 with the commander moving out into the channel. And this was a tremendous sight to see ships from one end of the horizon to the other. Ships of all kinds. They tell me there was well over 1,000 ships. But even so, we thought this was just another exercise. As we continued on, we felt that we'd be turned around, go back and try again another day. But when we continued on into the night, we knew it was the real thing. At one time, we had a bit of a scare. They said there was a submarine in the area, and one of the DE boats threw some bombs into the channel. And they exploded, but we never saw any attack at all. Here are some scenes actually taken close to the beach, where the ships made a right-angle turn and headed for the area where we were to land. That is a DE boat in the distance. And of course, we were on the alert for any kind of attack, even airplane attacks. Fortunately, our Air Force did their job well, and at no time did I know of a German attack, except after we had landed, 2 planes attempted to strafe the beach. To be in the area. Now these are some scenes that I took with my camera that was reduced to 16 millimeter. This particular scene of these men going ashore was taken by an automatic camera aboard a British landing craft, and they were the first men to land. The reason it was taken by an automatic camera was because they wanted to have a record of what happened should the landing fail. At least they might have a record if they were able to recover the film of what happened and how to avoid it if they had to try another attack. But here are some scenes landing on the Utah beach, and this is the way we went ashore. This is, again, is at the British beach, but you notice the men didn't dash ashore after being aboard a landing craft for 5 solid days. They just walked slowly and cautiously, fearful of bombs and mines that were sown in the area. You notice they had their rifles wrapped in cellophane. But this is the way we had to go ashore. And I needn't tell you that a lot of the boys didn't make it. Here's one of the famous scenes taken from black and white film of two men being shot down right before your eyes. Here is Pete Carroll and Wes Haynes carrying our own equipment, and the ship is grounded on the beach. The section of the beach we were on was being attacked by enemy fire, and in the previous shot you could see a bomb actually land not too far from where we were. There it is again. The bulldozers were trying to clear roads to let our jeeps and tanks move forward. And even though it was June, the area was quite cold, as it usually is in that part of Normandy. Of course, the men dug their foxholes a little deeper, and we had the good fortune of finding a concrete wall, which helped serve as protection. But even now, we're taking some of our wounded back to the beach so they can be transferred back to England. But when the tide went out, the ships could not come in close, or those that went aground had to wait for the high tide to be refloated if they weren't hit. We stayed on the beach the first night and lived in a foxhole, and soon we showed some of the first prisoners taken in the area late the first day, who were captured close to the beach and were sent back to England because there was no room to keep them there. This is our first command post, where General Collins on the left is talking to some of his officers, and we were able to get some of the first hot food at this place, and I didn't realize how hungry I was until I saw these pictures. There's Larry LeSueur again and Bob Landry on the right. Bob Landry was covering the war for Time and Life. And although it kept me very busy for 8 solid days, I used up all the film I had and decided to go back to France to get some more and probably to get a bath. I hadn't had my clothes off during that entire time. And my landing in England took place at a place near Bournemouth. It almost looks like the cliffs of Dover that everyone is familiar with. But it was a beautiful sight to see the coast of England and know that I could get some rest after a while. But didn't realize that at that time the buzz bombs would start coming over. Here we see some of them flying over the English coastline. And these buzz bombs were a terror weapon. They didn't know where they would land, but the British were quick to set up machine guns and anti-aircraft fire to knock them out of the sky, and they managed to shoot down quite a few. They even sent planes up into the sky to knock them out of the air. And of course, sometimes they did get through, and where they fell, they caused considerable damage. But you must have missed that pretty good shooting. There's one actually coming down, and it landed in the London area, and wherever they landed, they caused considerable damage. My second crossing of the channel was made on an LST, and this time with units of the 3rd Armor Division that was sorely needed because they had tanks and vehicles to carry us in the direction of Cherbourg, because we needed a port badly. The LST was manned by a British crew. That's the captain in the British uniform. But we were in a long convoy of many of them, everyone loaded to the gills with equipment that was sorely needed. But here you get an idea of what the beach looked like. And these ships are actually waiting for the tide to recede so they could send their equipment ashore without going through deep water. On D-Day, they had to go through the deep water. And at this particular moment, they're waiting for the rams to be rebuilt after a severe storm so they could go ashore without damage. Now, you can see the problems they had on D-Day, because when the landing craft hit the sandbars, the men started wading ashore and found deeper water ahead, and those that had their life preservers too low around their waist turned turtle, and many were drowned. But these are units of the 3rd Army heading in, crossing the deep spot just ahead of them, and headed toward Cherbourg itself. This was a remarkable sight.
soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Well, the detailed planning started long about the fall of 1943 and was under charge of a man named Morgan, General Fred Morgan of the British Army. And it took months of planning, and he was in many ways the father of the plan that was executed here, the start being on D-Day.
And what about the date? When was that first chosen?
Well, there was first of all, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the two governments, the Western governments, had told Generalissimo Stalin that we would attack in May. So we began to examine the weather, and we had to have a particular combination of tides, light, and moon. And this was showed that you had about a few days in June where you could have the perfect conditions, or nearly perfect conditions, and a few days in May. We'd like to have gone on the 5th of May. But to get the breadth of attack we thought necessary, we had to wait until June. Now, the ideal days were from June 4th. 5th was the ideal day, but 4th was satisfactory, 5th, 6th, and 7th, and even possibly 8th. But that would have been stretching a little bit. Now, I picked June 5th as the best. And we came down here hoping and praying that the weather would be sufficiently good we could go on the June 5th.
Well, General Eisenhower, June 4th was the day when you had to make the decision to go on June the 5th.
That is correct.
What happened on that day, June 4th?
Early on the morning of June 4th, I came from my camp about a mile from here, came into this room. And Captain Stagg, who was the chief meteorologist for the Allied forces, he was supported by 2 or 3 Americans and a couple other Britishers. But he made the presentations. That morning, the stars were out, it looked beautiful, and he gave us the worst report you ever saw. And he talked about gales hitting the Normandy beaches, and winds up to the rate of 45 miles an hour, that kind of thing. Landing would be impossible. So I just said, all right, we have to postpone. So we postponed for 24 hours.
There wasn't any question of going the 5th. I mean, none of your commanders said
oh, no.
advised
well,
going.
I believe Montgomery said he was ready to go. But it didn't, the conditions were such that I knew. We'd had our troubles down in the Casablanca beach when you got surf pretty high. We also had some in Sicily. So it was it wasn't in the cards. You couldn't go.
So you stood down on the 4th.
That's right, and that was then the weather when we did that looked so lovely. But in the morning of the 5th, Walter, here's the big thing. Morning of 5th, I came over here. The weather was terrible. This house was shaking. Now, you know, this, you said, well, there's no use almost of looking at this thing again, but there's this one thing about it. It certainly increased my confidence in Captain Stagg and his crowd, because the 24 hours earlier, when it looked so bad, so nice, they said, this is what you're going to have, and we had it. Oh, it was really storming.
General Eisenhower, who was here with you?
Well, first of all, it was my Chief of Staff, General Smith, an American. And then we had General Montgomery from the British forces and General Bradley from ours. Then there was Ramsey, who was the naval commander, Lee Mallory, who was the British commander of the Air Forces. My deputy was Tedder, and all those people were here. And there wasn't too much talk. We listened, and all of us had heard this, you know, time and again, because you remember, we had made practice runs. We'd had Captain Stagg and his group before us, certainly before me, for twice a day for some days to just see how this thing worked out. Because we'd always have the proof 2 days later, you see. And he told us the evening before, we might have a little bit of improvement in this weather next day, and we talked that over. That was about 10 o'clock on the night of June the 4th. We talked it over and we chatted around here maybe for a half hour. But the next morning, when he came in, sort of a little grin on his face, he didn't laugh too much, but he was a fine man. And he said, well, I'll give you some good news. And then he told us about this high that got in here and gave us some hope. And he, as I remember, he predicted this good weather would last between 24 and 36 hours. Now that wasn't too good, because you could get so many troops ashore and then have to stop landing. It would be pretty bad. But we were trying for these
About 20 hours to wait before the first airborne troops went in, and 26 hours before the ground forces hit the beach. What did you do during all those hours of waiting?
Well, of course, that's the most terrible time for the senior commander. He's done all that he can do, all the planning, and matter of fact, there's very little more that any commander below above division command can do anything after once you get started. So the first thing I did, I went over and fortified myself with a lot of coffee and breakfast. Then I began to go up and down the wharves. Some of the ships were still starting out, and I saw people that had sent them off and so on. And I came up here during the middle of the day to see if any news coming out, and I kept pretty close to my communication center. And then finally, along about 6 in the evening, I went over to a field from which the American airborne, started out. Now, I couldn't go to all these fields because there were many of them, but I did go into the 101st Division, and it was a very fine experience. They were getting ready, and all camouflaged, and their faces blackened and all this. And there they saw me, and of course they'd recognize me. And they said, now quit worrying, General, we'll take care of this thing for you. And that kind of thing was a good feeling. As they started off, I watched them out of sight. Then it took me a couple hours to get back to my headquarters.
One of the most famous pictures of D-Day was of you talking to the paratroopers in their camouflage. And one of the versions of that visit, I think, said that as you turned away, this reporter saw a tear in your eye.
Well, I don't know about that. It could have been possible, because, look, here's the kind of an operation you start. You know there are going to be losses along the line. They're going to be bad, because we knew this. They were mobile troops, German troops in that area. There was all sorts of flak, anti-aircraft stuff. And there could easily have been fighters coming into these helpless troop carriers. It's I would think, if a man didn't show a bit of emotion, it would show that he probably was a little bit inhuman. And goodness knows, those fellows meant a lot to me. And you just had to make these decisions on the base when you're in war. I'm going to do something that will be to my country's advantage for the least cost. You can't say without cost. You know they're going to lose.
Well, now, in the selection of Normandy, as opposed to the Pas-de-Calais area where the crossing was much shorter and so forth, was the surprise element of Normandy the principal factor in making that decision, or were there other factors?
Yes, that was one. Although, strangely enough, Hitler, with all his intuition, did have one good guess. But he never thought it was good enough that he would order the main defense to be made in Normandy. We knew, of course, you could not keep the Germans from knowing that great things were afoot. We had to try to surprise him on location and timing. And then timing, not only the general timing, but if possible, in the time of day. In any way that you would surprise him, that was all to our benefit. Well, more than anything else, the airdrop, particularly the airdrop in the Cotentin Peninsula. We thought that it was necessary because here is the Utah beach down here, right here, really is where the landing spot. Behind that was a big lagoon that had been constructed by the Germans. Over that lagoon, which was a deep one, were just several exits, and only 3 of them were usable. Now, we felt unless we had some of the paratroopers to come and get the exits of that lagoon, these people here might be pinned down, and then Bosch artillery and mortars and so on just pound them to pieces, and the thing would be done, just no good. This attack, first of all, was just going to be this. Now we wanted to widen it to get this in here and to get Cherbourg more quickly and to spread the defenses. Well, Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory, very courageous man, had made up his mind that this area in here, which had been reinforced with mobile troops and which had a lot of flak, and particularly along the coastlines, would just be probably too tough for the the paratroopers to get in there. But we had done the best we could, and with General Bradley and General Ridgway being the senior paratrooper of the Americans, we decided that it ought to go on anyway, and we needed to go on if we were going to have this attack go in.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, with success thus far. And so, in this poignant hour, I ask you to join with me in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard. For the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tried by night and by day, without rest, until the victory is won. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest, They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. And for us at home, fathers, mothers, children, wives, sisters, and brothers of brave men overseas, whose thoughts and prayers are ever with them, help us, Almighty God, to rededicate ourselves in renewed faith in Thee in this hour of great sacrifice. Many people have urged that I call the nation into a single day of special prayer. But because the road is long and the desire is great, I ask that our people devote themselves in a continuance of prayer as we rise to each new day, and again when each day is spent, let words of prayer be on our lips, invoking thy help to our efforts. And let our hearts be stout to wait out the long travail, to bear sorrows that may come, to impart our courage unto our sons, wheresoever they may be. And, O Lord, give us faith. Give us faith in Thee, faith in our sons, faith in each other, faith in our united crusade. Let not the keenness of our spirit ever be dulled. Let not the impacts of temporary events, of temporal matters of but fleeting moment, let not these deter us in our unconquerable purpose. With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy. Help us to conquer the apostles of greed and racial arrogances, a peace invulnerable to the schemings of unworthy men, and a peace that will let all men live in freedom, reaping the just rewards of their honest toil. Thy will be done, Almighty God. Amen.
They were under fire all the time. And finally, some hardy soul just got up and says, "Come on, fellas, I'm sick of this and let's try it." And we began to see these little individual acts of heroism coming to its very acme, you know. And the fellow starts off with that high ground up there, and they get 2 or 3 behind him. They get to become 20 and 30, and finally you've got some real power. And things begin to loosen up.
Did you ever learn who was the man who finally said, "Let's get off these beaches and get in them"?
Well, there was no one good. You see, up until you can get communication with between companies to battalions and battalions to regiments and regiments to your division, there's not much that a fellow can do. He doesn't know what's going on. It had to be the local commanders, the platoon leaders and the squad leaders. That was not a general's battle, after all. We'd all done all the planning. We thought we had made the best plan that would save the most lives and get the most benefit out of it. But those are the people that had to do the job, and we must never forget that. It was just GI and the platoon and company and squad leaders.
General, was there any thought during the difficult hours of D-Day here on the beach of withdrawing?
No, the General Bradley told me a little later it would have been impossible to have brought these people back and trying to re-embark them in the ships. Matter of fact, the ships were doing something else that time. But what he did begin to study was the possibility of taking his follow-ups that we now couldn't come in here because of the fire and the jam on the beach, and taking some of them into Utah, trying to cut around this whole area and therefore relieve it, and some of them possibly even into the British sector on the eastward. Remember, we had an objective. You see that high ground out above there? Now behind that is a road, and that road runs all the way through to Senia from the right through Bayou and away on the left, on our left. And that was their objective. And finally, about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, we began to make real penetration. Everything began to loosen up, and we gave a sigh of relief, particularly the commander's office. Well, of course, the first day you couldn't tell by counting the drowned, the killed, the wounded, and some missing. We had over 2,000 casualties on this beach, the Omaha beach. And these youngsters coming in here paid this terrible price. And on this one beach alone, on that one day, was quite heavy. To believe, to remember this is what those fellows were fighting for and sacrificing for, that these people could do this. Walter, this D-Day has a very special meaning for me, and I'm not referring merely to the anxieties of the day, the anxieties that were a natural part of sending in an invasion where you knew that many hundreds of boys were going to give their lives or be maimed forever. But my mind goes back so often to this fact. On D-Day, my own son graduated from West Point. And after his training with his division, he came over with the 71st Division, but that was some time after this event. But on the very day he was graduating, these men came here, British and our other allies, the Americans, to storm these beaches for one purpose only. Not to gain anything for ourselves, not to fulfill any ambitions that America had for conquest, but just to preserve freedom, systems of self-government in the world. Many thousands of men have died for ideals such as these. And here again, in the 20th century, for the second time, Americans, along with the rest of the free world, but Americans had to come across the ocean to defend those same values. Now, my own son has been very fortunate. He has had a very full life since then. He is a father of 4 lovely children that are very precious to my wife and me. But these young boys, so many of them, over whose graves we have been treading, looking at, wondering and contemplating about their sacrifices. They were cut off in their prime. They have families that grieve for them, but they never knew the great experiences of going through life like my son can enjoy. I devoutly hope that we will never again have to see such scenes as these. I think and hope, pray, that the humanity will learn more than we had learned up to that time. But these people gave us a chance, and they bought time for us so that we can do better than we have before. So every time I come back to these beaches, or any day when I think about that day 20 years ago, I say once more, we must find some way to work to peace and to really to gain an eternal peace for this world.
This is much the greatest thing we have ever attempted.
You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade. Your task will not be an easy one.
I was in yellow, but I was scared. I was scared to death.
Two years after the ordeal of Dunkirk, Britain struggles on. Despite the support of American industry and resources, there is little optimism from the battlefields. The disaster of the fall of Singapore in February 1942 and the surrender of Tobruk in June bring the darkest days of the Second World War. But in southern Russia, Hitler's armies are being bled dry in a vicious fight against the Soviet Union. As 1942 wears on, the German advance in the east slows. The diary of an infantry officer.
It's terrible here. Russians resisting hard. They're getting reinforcements all the time. One of our companies wouldn't fight. Very shameful. Every single one of us is tense.
By February 1943, the once invincible German army will be defeated at the Great Battle of Stalingrad. Allied confidence grows. Then, at long last, a victory for Britain and America in North Africa. General Alexander in a telegram to Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
Sir, it is my duty to report that the Tunisian campaign is over. All enemy resistance has ceased. We are masters of the North African shores.
At home, a new mood of confidence galvanizes the nation. A survey of public opinion carried out by mass observation.
The general picture is one of considerable optimism about future developments in the war. A successful outcome is expected by the overwhelming majority.
Housewife Margaret Compton.
The outcry for a second front in Europe grows and grows. There are meetings about it in Trafalgar Square, speeches all over the country. Strike in the West. Start a second front now. But the government reveals nothing of its plans.
But secret planning for a major assault on Western Europe has begun in earnest. Throughout 1943, the Allied leaders meet in a series of conferences to plan the route to victory. Churchill and US President Franklin Roosevelt confirm the Germany First policy, convinced that Japan will capitulate after Germany is defeated. General Alan Brooke accompanies Churchill to the Casablanca Conference.
The back of the work here is broken, and thank God for it. It has been one of the most difficult tasks I've had to do. Although our discussions have become somewhat heated at times, our relations have never been strained. I hope we shall leave here with a more united outlook to the war.
During the conference, the British persuade a reluctant United States to begin the assault on Europe in Sicily, before an attack on occupied France. Churchill's strategy to strike at what he calls Hitler's soft underbelly in Italy postpones the invasion of France for almost a year. But it buys vital time for the build-up of resources and manpower. In July 1943, British and American troops successfully land in Sicily. Hitler's ally, the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, is overthrown. Italy soon surrenders. Churchill and Roosevelt now turn their attention to preparing for a massive invasion of France within a year. A report of the Combined Chiefs of Staff Quebec Conference, August 1943.
This operation will be the primary United States and British ground and air effort against the Axis of Europe. Following the establishment of strong Allied forces in France, operations designed to strike at the heart of Germany and to destroy her military forces will be undertaken. We have approved the outline plan for Operation Overlord.
As the plans for the Allied invasion of Europe are being laid, the United States Army Air Force and the Royal Air Force carry out massive day and night bombing raids over Germany. A directive issued by the Combined Chiefs of Staff.
Your primary objective will be the progressive destruction and dislocation of the German military, industrial and economic system, and the undermining of the morale of the German people to a point where their capacity for armed resistance is fatally weakened.
Len Hadland on night bombing duty with the RAF.
Having seen my name on the battle order, I once again experienced that awful tension which comes with knowing what we might be up against. And the possibility that we might not return.
The Allied aerial bombing campaign is relentless and brutal. Among the British people, memories of their own horrific experiences during the Blitz evoke sympathy for German civilians from some, but none at all from others. 2 anonymous contributions to the Mass Observation Survey.
They didn't think twice when they bombed us. All's fair in love and war.
I feel terrible when I think of what those poor bastard women and children must be going through. I only hope that what they say is right, and all the kids have been evacuated.
November 1943. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin enters strategic discussions with Churchill and Roosevelt at the Tehran Conference. U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower at the Tehran Conference. U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is appointed Supreme Allied Commander. The date for the Great Invasion is confirmed. Summer 1944. Britain becomes a vast military camp in preparation for Operation Overlord. Allied troops gather from Poland, France, Canada, and the United States. The long wait begins. U.S. war correspondent Ernie Pyle.
Some people say the British have been at war so long they've forgotten about peacetime life and are resigned to the war dragging on and on. But I don't sense any such resignation. There are all kinds of wisecracks about the way Americans have flooded the island and nearly crowded the British off.
U.S. Army Air Force General Louis Brereton.
A standing joke among Americans is the British habit of saying, "You can't miss it," when giving directions. I don't know why it is, but the British simply can't give understandable directions.
The presence of a huge contingent of foreign troops doesn't meet with everyone's approval. Tom Stewart.
This place is full of Canadians and Americans, and the things I've witnessed have to be seen to be believed. It is a literal fact that all the girls here only think about courting, beer, and movies.
Maureen Bolster in a letter to her boyfriend in the RAF.
Their manners were so awful. They did nothing but criticize England the whole time. I was simply bristling with patriotism. How dare those Yanks come here and run my country down?
For visiting servicemen, accusations of rudeness and fraternization are the least of their worries. rehearsals and training for an amphibious and airborne assault are endless. Fears about the real thing grow as the weeks pass. Donald Burgett of the U.S. Airborne Forces.
An instructor in A stage told us that we weren't volunteering for any picnic, that most of us would die in combat. In fact, he said, if any man lives through 3 missions, the government has said it will fly that man home and discharge him. Now you know as well as I do that Uncle Sam ain't gonna discharge anyone during wartime. So now you know what your chances are of living through this war? You haven't got a chance.
In occupied France, German troops have been enjoying the comfortable life of conquerors for almost 4 years. But for the French, the situation is unbearable.
These hands in grey and black are everywhere. How sickening those colors. There is no escape from the Germans. They jostle and elbow you, these victors. Murderers of relatives, friends and brothers. The value of freedom is not realized until it is lost.
By the beginning of 1944, following yet more losses on the Eastern Front, Hitler knows that soon he will also have to face an Allied invasion in the West. Hitler to his generals.
The threat from the east remains, but an even greater danger looms in the west, the Anglo-American landing. If the enemy here succeeds in penetrating our defenses on a wide front, consequences of staggering proportions will follow. All signs point to an imminent offensive against the western front of Europe.
Hitler orders Field Marshal Erwin Rommel to take responsibility for the Atlantic defenses. Senior German officers begin a detailed inspection. Rommel writes to his wife,
I'm going to throw myself into this new job with everything I've got. And I'm going to see it is a success. Our chance will be on the beaches. That's where the enemy is always the weakest.
General Sir Bernard Montgomery is appointed commander of Allied ground forces for the invasion. He has first-hand experience of Rommel's tactical ability from the North African campaign.
Rommel is in command from Holland to the Loire. It is now clear that his intention is to defeat us on the beaches. He has made a world of difference since he took over. We must blast our way on shore and get a good footing before he brings up his reserves.
While the Germans know that there will be an Allied attack, they can only guess where or when it will take place. Churchill warns the British that secrecy must be maintained at all costs.
We shall require from our own people here, from Parliament, from the press, from all classes, the same cool, strong nerves, the same toughness of fiber which stood us in good stead in those days when we were all alone under the German Blitz. And here I must warn you that in order to deceive and baffle the enemy, as well as to exercise the forces, there will be many false alarms, many feints, and many dress rehearsals.
Under Churchill's Operation Bodyguard, elaborate deceptions are created with the intention of preventing Hitler from discovering the date and location of the invasion. The French resistance helped to create false intelligence to keep Germany off the scent. Secrets are deliberately leaked, which suggests that the invasion will take place in the Pas-de-Calais or even Norway. The BBC French service becomes a vital means of communication across the Channel.
In due course, instructions of great importance will be given to you through this channel. But it will not always be possible to give these instructions at a previously announced time. Therefore, you must get into the habit of listening at all hours.
Louis Lenné, a member of the Maquis, the French resistance, June 1944.
We had an old radio that kept us up to date with the situation. We heard the famous line from Paul Verlaine's poem, The Long Sobs of the Violins in Autumn, telling us of a large-scale attack within days.
Across Britain, tension grows as security tightens. Louis Brereton.
Preparations for the invasion are being felt. All leave has been canceled as of midnight. A strip of the English coast facing Europe is out of bounds to all travelers without official business. Counterintelligence crews are active throughout London and other centers of population to guard against violations of military security. Across the Channel, the Germans are working feverishly to strengthen the Atlantic Wall. Everyone knows the invasion is coming, but few know when.
The Allies brace themselves for the biggest test of the war. Churchill, in a telegram to Roosevelt.
If we make serious mistakes in the campaign of 1944, we might give Hitler the chance of a startling comeback. This shows the need for the greatest care and foresight. My dear friend, this is much the greatest thing we have ever attempted.
Hello, BBC. This is Godfrey Talbot reporting from Rome. Allied troops have occupied Rome, which was the fascist capital. And are these people here delighted?
The Allied liberation of Rome, June 1944. It is welcome news for anxious comrades at home in Britain. 4th of June. More than 1 million men are on the move throughout southern England. Operation Overlord will make landfall on the beaches of Normandy. The attack is imminent. Captain Douglas Aitken, a medical officer, 24th Lancers.
Only 7 miles to go to the docks, but the trip's a slow one. American military police in their jeep lead us all the way. We pass along well-known roads. I must say I take a deeper than normal interest in these last glimpses of England. I occasionally find myself thinking foolish thoughts about not coming back, or being away for a hell of a long time.
In addition to the vast armada of men and their machines of war, several hundred war correspondents from all over the world await the invasion. Ernie Pyle is one of them.
None of us knew when the invasion would be or where. Some of the eager ones tried to pull strings to get front seats in the invasion armada. Others, with better judgment, just kept quiet and let matters take their course.
Captain Smith, number 4 Commando.
There was more than the usual quota of farewells banded between friends. I have never loved Britain so truly as at that moment. It was exhilarating, glorious, and heartbreaking.
Captain Alistair Bannerman.
The deck is packed with tractors, jeeps, personnel carriers, guns and tanks. I haven't much time left. I know I'm no hero. I pray for the courage.
The invasion plan requires the high tides of a full moon and a clear night. But the weather deteriorates. Eisenhower postpones the departure of the troops from English shores by 24 hours. Any further delay will rule out an invasion for a month. The D-Day landings will now take place on the 6th of June. For the assault troops, now crowded into more than 2,000 transport vessels, the delay adds to the tension. Bob Koch, 116th Infantry Regiment.
The weather looked so bad, we wondered whether the whole thing would be called off. We played cards, relaxed as much as possible, thought about our families, and prayed. Some boys said they knew they'd never make it. I wasn't yellow, but I was scared. No question about it. I was scared to death.
Of June, D-Day -1. Following the long delay in harbour, the cross-channel journey begins. The Normandy beaches are almost 100 miles from the south coast of England. Lieutenant Sidney Beck.
The great decision was taken. The Armada set sail despite most unfavourable weather reports. As they steamed by, Captain Perry and Captain Hall flashed signals by lamp. Good luck. As we passed the Needles and felt the first Atlantic swells, we knew there was no turning back. The Solent was chock-a-block with ships of all shapes and sizes, all straining at the leash, waiting for the greatest amphibious operation the world had ever seen.
Able seaman Bill Cutler is aboard HMS Largs.
What a task we have ahead of us. What losses are we to suffer? All are going in fully knowing the task set. We will not fail.
The fleet reaches its assembly point in mid-channel. The rough seas have convinced Hitler that an attack is unlikely. False intelligence has suggested that the invasion will take place anywhere but on the coast of Normandy and on any day except the 6th of June. Erwin Rommel has left for Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday. The Order of the Day is issued by Supreme Commander General Eisenhower.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. Your task will not be an easy one. But this is the year, 1944. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. Good luck.
As more than 2,000 Allied ships head to the French coast under cover of darkness, British and American airborne troops prepare to take off for France. Private George Alex, 82nd Airborne Division.
I was getting nervous, butterflies in my stomach. We were told that the entire coast of France was mined. Fields were flooded to keep our gliders from landing. We didn't know what to expect, so we expected the worst.
Dawn, 6th of June, D-Day. Massive Allied air power is unleashed on northern France. Nearly 200 ships bombard 50 miles of the Normandy coastline. Bill Cutler.
Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, pounding away at the enemy beaches. Goodness knows how any living thing can stand up to such terrific battering.
Lieutenant Cyrus Eidlert, USS Bayfield.
It was like 1,000 4th of Julys rolled into one. The resounding blasts were terrifying. The ship shook and quivered as if she knew what was happening.
U.S. forces are to attack the beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha. Corporal Gil Murdoch on his way to Omaha.
The transporters cut engines. We clambered over the railings into the landing craft. Some guys were seasick. Some were arguing over little things that didn't count. Some guys, like myself, were just standing there, thinking and shivering.
Sergeant Levers of the Canadian Scottish Regiment approaches Juno Beach.
The machine gun bullets are starting to whine. Is down.
Sergeant Harry Bear.
My radio man had his head blown off 3 yards from me. The beach was covered with bodies.
Lieutenant Alex Sudborough, number 45 Commando, Royal Marines, Sword Beach. Royal Marines, Sword Beach.
I couldn't help noticing the sweet, sickly smell.
Captain Jim Roberts, Omaha.
There were bodies everywhere. As I went by, I heard people screaming for morphine. There wasn't a thing I could do.
Lieutenant John Pelly of the Royal Navy is aboard HMS.
This is the BBC Home Service. D-Day has come. Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces supported by strong air forces began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
By the end of D-Day, more than 180,000 Allied troops have secured a narrow beachhead in Normandy. In some places, they have advanced up to 5 miles inland. Although the airborne assault has been fraught with difficulty, most units have been joined by land troops. More than 2,500 Allied men, mostly Americans, have lost their lives. Many more German defenders are dead. Thousands of French civilians have died in bombing raids. But the Allies' veil of secrecy around the invasion had so effectively convinced Hitler and his high command that the attack would come in the Pas-de-Calais, the Germans have limited resources for a counterattack. A week after the invasion, Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke arrives in Normandy.
The scene was beyond description. Everywhere was covered with ships, of all shapes and sizes. There was a sense of continuous activity. It was a wonderful moment to find myself re-entering France, almost 4 years after being thrown out.
Gigantic floating harbours, mulberries, an idea initiated by Churchill himself, have been towed across the Channel. The mulberries become the vital supply point for up to 10,000 tons of material per day. Inland, Allied troops are adapting to their role as liberators. War photographer Robert Capa.
We received a little book telling us how to address the natives. Bonjour, monsieur. Nous sommes les amis américains. That was for addressing the men. Bonjour, mademoiselle. Voulez-vous faire une promenade avec moi? That was for the girls. The first one meant, Mister, don't shoot me. And the other could mean anything.
But not everyone welcomes the Allied presence. Sir Alan Brooke.
The French did not seem in any way pleased to see us arrive as a victorious army to liberate France. They had been quite content as they were. We were bringing war and desolation to their country.
Richard Greenwood, Royal Tank Regiment.
Saw a few natives on today's journey through villages and fields. Not much evidence of enthusiasm amongst them. Perhaps they resent our intrusion. I can well understand this. Their former, lovely countryside is now a battleground.
Over the coming weeks, the land battle intensifies. The German army repeatedly attempts fierce counterattacks. The Normandy countryside, with its patchwork of small fields and tall hedgerows, proves to be a difficult battleground. But overwhelming Allied air power is crucial in the battle. Field Marshal von Kluge replaces Rommel in July. He writes to Hitler,
"In the face of the enemy's complete command of the air, there is no possibility of our finding a strategy to counterbalance its truly annihilating effect unless we retreat. In spite of intense efforts, the moment has drawn near when this front will break."
German confidence is ebbing. Of those captured, many are young and inexperienced. Some are East Europeans forced into fighting for Hitler's cause. General Gunther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to the Supreme Commander in the West.
Our forces are being bled white. The replacement situation is impossible. We simply don't have the men to contain the pressure anymore.
By late July, the Allies achieve a breakthrough. Saint-Lô and Caen are captured, but the victories come at a price. In the assault on Saint-Lô, more than 3,000 Americans are killed. On August the 26th, Allied troops celebrate the liberation of Paris. General Charles de Gaulle, the exiled commander of Free French forces, returns to lead the triumphant parade. Lieutenant John Osland, 4th U.S. Infantry Division.
In the street was the largest crowd I've ever seen. Thousands of people, all there to see de Gaulle and to celebrate the liberation of their city. They had waited 4 years for this day.
Elisabeth de Mirabel of the Free French.
It was beyond all we could have imagined. The atmosphere of feverish joy was overwhelming. The excitement was intoxicating. Yet death and suffering still lay at the door.
The battle for Normandy has been a long and bitter fight. Almost 500,000 Allied and German troops are dead, injured, or missing in action. Though the war is not yet over, and it will be many months before the Allies reach Berlin, the events of D-Day and the battle for Normandy are the beginning of the end for Hitler's Third Reich. From the memoirs of Ernie Pyle, killed in action by the Japanese in April 1945, his account for August 1944, Paris.
One cannot help but be moved by the colossus of our invasion. It was a bold and mighty thing, one of the epics of all history. I hope that we can rejoice in victory, but humbly. The dead men would not want us to gloat.